A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICAN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. Today we will be taking up newspapers of Thursday and Friday, that is yesterday's and today. So over the weekends we will cover up the backlog of Tuesday and Wednesday. So let's try to keep ourselves in the current mode to take up today's newspaper and yesterday. Backlog will be covered in the weekend. So we will start with the first topic, which is about disaster management. Disaster management is a part of your GS3 syllabus. So the reason why we are discussing about this topic is because of Cyclone NIVAR, which has now hit the southern coast of Andhra Pradesh, Puducherry and Tamil Nadu. So this has caused displacement of a lot of people, but however the loss of lives has been very minimal. 3 lives have been lost, though the damage to property has been there, but however the loss of life has been minimal. So therefore, when we compare it with the 2015 floods that had struck Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, the 15 flood was very devastating. But however, this flood, Cyclone NIVAR, did not bring up such a huge amount of devastation and the loss of lives and the assets or infrastructure. So which means that some of the lessons that we had to learn from our previous disasters on how to manage a disaster has been well learned by us. But however, some of the lessons do remain to be learned. So this disaster can be given as an example of how a tropical cyclone did not bring out a huge loss of life or property, because we have learned some of the lessons related to disaster management well from the experience of previous disasters. So this disaster can in such cases be quoted as a case study where we have been able to manage this thing very well. So the first is about the alerts and the warning, which have been coming very timely. So this helped in the timely evacuation of people from those areas and districts that were to be hit by the cyclone. Second is the IMD forecasting. IMD forecasting has also now become more precise and also very timely and accurate. So this has again helped us in dealing with the disaster very timely. Next is the satellite technology. Now with the improvement in the satellite technology, we have been able to collect a lot of data about the weather systems developing across the world, and we have been able to communicate it to the concerned people so that they can analyze this data and then bring about accurate forecasting for the timely response to the disaster. So the satellite technology is another factor which is something that we have learnt our lessons from the previous disasters, that the use of satellite technology and the analysis of the data so collected is extremely important. Next, during this disaster, more than 24 NDRF teams had been deployed. So this was a kind of this made the civil agencies in the region also feel better that there is a lot of preparedness because of the deployment of the NDRF teams. And these National Disaster Response Force teams have also been responsible for timely evacuation of the people before the cyclone struck. So this way, these were some of the lessons that we have learned and that were replicated in this management of NIVAR, so that the loss of life was minimized to a great extent. What we learned is that the encroachment that is happening on floodplains, lakes and wetlands. So this is observed previously in Andhra Pradesh also we had seen this, and now in Tamil Nadu also when they last month when the floods happened in Hyderabad, then also we discussed how there had been encroachment upon the wetlands and floodplains due to urbanization at a rapid phase, due to unsustainable urbanization. So even in this case in Pondicherry and also in Tamil Nadu, the floodplains, lakes and the wetlands have been encroached and there has been a change in the land use pattern. So this is one thing where we need to learn our lesson, otherwise this is going to repeat itself in the future also. So we need to make sure that the land use pattern is very sustainable and it doesn't lead to the encroachment of the wetlands, lakes and the floodplains. So this is something that we need to learn whenever we are trying to manage disasters in the future. So now we move on to the next topic. Lesson that remains. The second topic is about the interfaith marriages, which is a part of your GS2 syllabus, or as a part of the Indian society, it can also be a part of your GS1 syllabus. Now, this is a very sensitive topic and you must have a very balanced opinion. If at all such a controversial question on this topic gets asked, you have to put forward a balanced opinion without showing what you internally or emotionally feel about the topic. So this we are discussing in the context of an ordinance that the Uttar Pradesh government has now brought about, wherein it says that whenever an interfaith marriage has happened, and if the administration feels that, if the government feels that the intent of the marriage was actually basically to convert the woman into a different religion, then the state will have the right to annul such a marriage. So this is basically the crux of the ordinance that the UP government has now enacted. So in this context, we are going to analyze the pros and cons of such state intervention into the interfaith marriages. So this is some topic that we have discussed twice or thrice previously. So adding to that, we have to have a very balanced opinion and try to be as objective as possible without being emotional or sentimental about it. So when we talk of the pros, so if you read the editorials of various newspapers, it is definitely very hard to find a pros for such a measure. But then in the in your UPSC answer paper, it is not a right strategy to just criticize all the measures of the government. Being a civil servant, you must be able to weigh down the pros and cons of any measure taken by the government. So in this case, we will be taking course of a Supreme Court judgment in Stanislaus case. So quoting such a judgment will help you to quote your opinion through the opinion of the Supreme Court. So that will be much safer and also more objective way of displaying your opinion in the answer. So in the Supreme Court in Stanislaus case of 1977 held that the people have the right to propagate religion which has been given to them in the Constitution. But however, this right to propagate the religion does not mean the right to convert a person. So right to propagate does not include the right to convert, is what a Supreme Court held in the Stanislaus case. So this can be used to quote to say in your answer that sometimes forcible conversions may happen, and therefore it is a good thing that the state intervenes to prevent such forcible conversions from happening, because the Supreme Court has told in the Stanislaus case that the right to propagate religion, which is a fundamental right, does not under its ambit include the right to convert. So when there is no fundamental right to convert another person, so forcible conversions or fraudulent conversions should not happen, and in such cases state intervention is right. So that is what precisely the second point says, that whenever there is any fraudulent or forcible conversion, it might also then translate, or as a consequence of such fraudulent conversions, it might lead to a public order issue also. So there might be law and order, public order issue, and there may be some riots as well. So in order to prevent all this, definitely the state intervention is needed, because when the public order gets dispersed, then it is not just the two individuals who are now entering into an interfaith marriage who are impacted, but the rest of the society also is. So this warrants the intervention of the state, which would be right. So therefore, as fraudulent conversions will lead to public order issues, it is the right thing for the state to intervene and prevent such marriages which are solely done for the purpose of religious conversion. But there are definitely many cons to this measure, because it is a fundamental choice of a person, or freedom of a person, to make a choice about his or her life partner. So this choice has been given to every individual as a fundamental right in our Constitution itself. So if this ordinance is now implemented, and if later it becomes a law or legislation, then it means that this constitutional spirit of the giving every individual fundamental freedom of choice is getting violated. So the constitutional spirit will be violated when this act or this ordinance is brought into force. And the second thing is, this is very subjective, because to say that the intention of a marriage was to convert a woman into another religion, so how do you assess the intention? So intention is basically a very subjective word which could be which can have multiple interpretations. So this could definitely be misused by the police to harass people who might belong to a different religion. And the third cons is that because of all this, communal divisions can happen in the society, and there might be differences and dissensions between the two religions in the society. So this could lead to communal riots and hatred between the communities, and violate the spirit of brotherhood which our Constitution is talking about. And lastly, it also hints at the prevalence of patriarchy in India, because this ordinance is saying that whenever the intention of the marriage can be questioned, that is, the intention of the marriage was only to convert the woman, then it can be annulled by the state. So it is always the freedom of a woman about her life partner which is questioned in the entire act. So this again shows or hints at the prevalence of patriarchy in the Indian society. So this third issue is about the vaccination, which is a part of your healthcare issues under GS syllabus 2. So this whole article was about vaccine nationalism. That is, recently many of the countries' trials at various phases are going on for the COVID-19 vaccination. So in this regard, what is going to happen once the vaccination is found out and the vaccination is ready to be given to the people? So what kind of issues will this bring about, and what is it that we need to prioritize, and what steps we should take? So in this regard, the reason why this could lead to an issue is because several countries across the globe are now signing what are called as advance purchase agreements. So this advance purchase agreements is being signed between the governments on the one hand and the pharmaceutical companies on the other hand. So the governments are now saying to these pharmaceutical companies that once these companies manufacture the vaccination, then these governments are going to buy them. So such advance purchase agreements are being made by the government. So this in turn could lead to a difference between the developed countries who have the capacity to make these advance purchase agreements and the low and the middle income countries who do not have such monetary resources to make such advanced pricing agreements with the pharmaceutical companies. So this in the future could lead to a difference between the developed countries on the one hand and the low and the middle income countries on the other hand, who might not be able to have access to the doses of vaccination for their people. Second, within the country, it might lead to a lot of difference between the rich and the poor, because the rich can afford the vaccine while the poor can't. So these kind of issues are going to come up in the future, for which we have to start preparing from now itself. So these kind are leading to what is called as vaccine nationalism, where every country wants to ensure that its citizens are safeguarded. So this is how one country does not think much about the other countries and the access to vaccination to the other countries' people, but every country is more bothered about its own self. So this has kind of given rise to this phenomena of vaccine nationalism. So when vaccine nationalism is in operation, then equitable access will not be there for the vaccination to people across the globe. So the rich will have better access, the developed countries will have better access. So there will not be equitable access in the case of vaccine nationalism. So in such case, what is it that we have to do? The first thing to be done is to prioritize the high risk groups. And usually when we talk of high risk groups, these are those groups which are present in the low and the middle income countries. So people who are more poor, who are more mobile in the low and the middle income countries are those who belong to this high risk category. So first we have to prioritize them, because it is due to them that the infection may be spreading elsewhere as well. So we have to prioritize the high risk groups first. The second is to have a globally accepted framework. All the countries across the globe will have to deliberate, maybe at the international level, say at the WTO, and they have to come out at a mutually agreed framework about when the vaccination is available, how it needs to be distributed among various countries across the globe. So this mutually accepted framework among the countries is something that is required at the most immediate need. So next is rope in the GAVI, which is a Global Alliance on Vaccine Initiative. So this Gavi has been in existence even in the pre-COVID world, where this initiative had ensured that there is equitable distribution of life-saving vaccines across various countries. So this has been at the forefront of ensuring such a thing. So even now, Gavi can be roped in to ensure that there is equitable distribution of vaccine across various countries and even within the countries. So next, that what you can also write in the form of conclusion is the importance of the role that the WHO can play in this regard. So as far as this is concerned, the Director General of WHO has already suggested that all COVID technologies should be treated as a public good. So public good means what? Its regulation, its development, its innovation, manufacturing, sale, everything will be determined by the state. so that there is no personal profiteering that is happening for one pharmaceutical company, so that it doesn't become unaffordable for a section of people. So because of this, there is a suggestion by the Director General of WHO that all the COVID technology should be treated as a public good, and all the innovation, its development, manufacture and sale must be determined by this state. Apart from that, the WHO has also recommended that we need to create a voluntary pool. This voluntary pool will comprise of the patent rights, all the regulatory test data, everything, so that all these can be used by any country without any hindrance to the patents or the data. So that when this data is available to every country, then they can use it to develop vaccines, they can use it to develop therapies and diagnostics related to COVID-19. So this is another suggestion that WHO has made. Now let's look at what has been India's track record in this case. So under the trade related intellectual property systems, compulsory licensing has been proposed or even suggested even by WHO under the TRIPS framework. So compulsory licensing, it actually provides a framework under which the government can actually intervene in this case. So compulsory licensing means whenever a pharmaceutical company is selling some drug or technology at a very high cost, which is actually burdening a lot of people, and a lot of people are unable to afford such a drug, and which is a life-saving drug. So in such cases, the government can intervene and it can grant licenses to some of the generic manufacturers within the country, so that the cost of production of the medicine or the technology can be brought down, so that even a common man can have access to such drugs. So this is the concept of compulsory licensing. This was used by India previously in the Natco Pharma case. Natco Pharma was a generic pharmaceutical manufacturer, medicine manufacturer, while Bayer was a multinational company. So Bayer was manufacturing a drug called as NIVAR, which was an anti-cancer drug. But this was so heavily priced that people were unable to afford it. So therefore, government used this compulsory licensing first under this case, and it gave licensing to Natco Pharma, which is a generic manufacturer, to manufacture the generic version of NIVAR. So this brought down the rate or the price of this drug to a considerable extent, so that people could afford it. So Bayer even took this case to the courts as well. But however, TRIPS and the WHO itself has suggests compulsory licensing when it is a larger public interest that is involved. So even in this case, in the case of COVID-19 vaccine, taken by this India's track record, India will have to stick to its principle of ensuring a larger public good. And if that requires such intervention by the government like compulsory licensing, then it should not hesitate to. The second is India has already now communicated to the Intellectual Property Rights Council of WTO, talking about the waiver of technology, or waiver of any patent rights or trademarks or designs or anything that is related with COVID-19 vaccines and diagnostics. So on that, the intellectual property rights, whatever laws are applicable, whatever restrictions are applicable, should be waived off. So this was communicated by India to the IPR Council of WTO regarding all these technologies, trademarks, everything, trade designs and all that. Patents will have to be waived if they are related to COVID-19. So this is what India has done till now, and therefore we have to ensure in the future that whenever COVID-19 vaccine comes and is used in the country, it is done so that it is in the interest of the larger public. Now we move on to the next topic. This topic is about the employment related issues, which is a part of your GS 3 syllabus. So again, this article was basically telling that there are several issues in the economy now, because of which the job creation is becoming a difficulty. So in such a situation, what is it that we must focus on in the future? So first, it starts by talking about the issues that the Indian economy is facing. So first is that in the first quarter of 2020, 23.9% contraction in the Indian economy was observed. So this data also we had seen previously in our ICANN videos, that Indian economy contracted in the first quarter of 2020 by 23.9%. Even in the second quarter, there was a further contraction of 10% according to RBI data. So the first thing we know is that the economy is already under contraction. In such a situation, many jobs are also lost, and apart from the jobs that are lost, it is very difficult to recover those jobs and then again go on to create further new jobs. And also another issue is that 11 crore people actually demanded for work under MG Narega in the 7 months of the lockdown that was there in India. So this is a huge demand for MG Narega jobs, which means that many people would have lost their other jobs during the lockdown and the pandemic. And because they lost their other jobs for some or the other form of livelihood, they approached MG Narega and they demanded for the jobs. So this shows that many people would have lost their already existing jobs. So this means in the future, what we need to work upon is to recover these jobs and also to create new jobs. So then what we must do? First is we must encourage labor intensive industries. So be it leather or apparel. So these are some of the industries which are extremely labor intensive, and we need to encourage that. So these labor intensive industries not only produce for the domestic market, but they also produce for the export market. For example, more than half of the leather goods that is produced in India is exported, and more than 1/3 of the apparel produced in India is also exported. So this will not just bring us or create more jobs within the country domestically for domestic production, but because it is also getting exported, so we will in turn get more resources into the country, so that we can also expand more jobs because the export potential is much more. The second is again the role of exports. So we have to increase our exports. When we take measures to increase our exports, then simultaneously we will be able to create much more jobs, because leather, apparel, these are those sectors which still have further export potential, where we can further increase our exports. So if we invest more in these sectors and if we improve our competitiveness in these sectors to improve our exports, that will automatically create more jobs for us. Apart from creating more direct jobs, these exports will also give us or create more supporting jobs. For example, people who are engaged in transportation, in logistics, warehousing. So these supporting jobs are also going to get created. So recently, a research paper by Soumitra Chatterjee and Arvind Subramaniam has held that it was because of very good growth in the exports in the boom years of 2003 to 2012 that contributed to such a boom and a growth rate averaging nearly 8%. That was because of the growth in the exports that was happening. So during this time, the export growth was very much, which contributed to our GDP growth and creation of more jobs during this period. So this research again shows that we need to create or expand our exports so that we can also create. So in 2013 and 14, however, our export was 314 billion. And again in 2018-19, it was 313 billion. So you can see that over a period of 5 years, there has been absolutely no expansion or no increase in our exports. Our exports have, for all practical reasons, stagnated. So we need to come out of the stagnation, and there is a lot of scope and potential for us to export. And we have in the previous ICANN videos also seen how the policy of Vietnam and Bangladesh has been. They follow an open trade policy, and the wages in China are rising. And in the context of COVID-19 and the aggressive behavior of China, many companies want to move out of China and shift their base. And India can be a very good option for that. Many countries will be looking for an alternative source for imports rather than China. So India can actually be a good exporter of those products. So in such cases, there is a lot of potential for India to expand its exports, which it must do if it is really serious about creating more jobs. Next is our foreign trade policy. So foreign trade policy over the years has been very restrictive of imports and exports. So we have set up more barriers, be it trade barriers or tariff barriers or non-tariff barriers. We have imposed a lot of limits, quantitative limits. We have also come back to the regime of licensing, and the rupee issue also we saw the other day, how the rupee, because of the appreciation in the rupee, the export has fallen because more the rupee appreciates, more expensive our exports or our items will be at the international level. Therefore, less competitive they will be. So such a foreign trade policy will go against India's exports. and lesser the exports, lesser is the job creation. So similarly, even in this case, Arvind Subramaniam and Soumitra Chatterjee research suggests that there is a huge opportunity for India to expand its exports by nearly $60 billion. So this huge opportunity must be encashed by India, and rather than protectionism or such policy, inward looking policy, we must go for a more outward looking policy where we have a lot of trade with the other countries. This topic is again about the banking sector issues, which is a part of your GS3 syllabus. In the previous class, we discussed that an RBI appointed internal working group has recommended that we need more banks in India. And because of that, we can convert some of the very good performing NBFCs into banks. And these banks or these NBFCs can also be controlled by corporate houses. So in which case, if they are converted into banks, these banks could as well be controlled by the corporate houses. So in this regard, this article is talking about the cons or the various limitations or drawbacks or the risks that are involved in allowing these corporate house controlled banks to operate in India. As far as the advantages of this measure is concerned, we already saw that these NBFCs, when they are converted into banks, they will have access to low cost deposits, and these deposits can further be used to lend in the economy, and that will have a multiplier effect. So thereby it will lead to more investments and more savings in the country, because the economic survey has also pointed out that the investment rate has fallen in the country and so has the savings rate. So in this context, this article has wholly dedicated to analyzing the risks which are involved in converting NBFCs to banks, and these banks being controlled by big corporate houses. So in this case, the first issue is regarding the risky financing. Now these corporate houses may want to lend to some activities which may be very risky. If they go by the regular channels, it may not be possible for financing these activities through the regular channels. If they go by regular channels, the banks may not even finance or give loans, give credit to carry out these kind of risky activities. But now that the corporate houses are themselves having a control over these banks, it is very much possible that these risky activities could also be made to be funded by the banks. So that way the risky financing can happen by these banks because they are controlled by the corporate houses. But ultimately, if because of such financing such risky activities, if they fail, then it is the taxpayer's burden who will have to bear the losses and who will have to pay for it. So even the example of Indonesia is pertinent here to be mentioned, where Indonesia also started such a thing, but then it was a failure because the regulation of these connected lending could not be possible. The regulation of these lending to some of the risky activities could not be done properly in Indonesia also. So taking or learning from these examples, we know that it is very this can lead to risky lending by the corporates through the banks, and ultimately it can lead to a burden on the taxpayer. So we must avoid such a measure. The next issue is delaying the exit. So many of the cases it so happens that a corporate company is there and it is unable to pay back its loans, and therefore it wants to exit. It thinks that it is not able to run its business anymore profitably, so it wants to exit. But imagine a time where the corporate house itself is controlling the bank, and the corporate house does not want to exit the business, another business into which it has made the bank lend. That is because corporate house has an interest in keeping that business running with the hope that it is going to renew that and it might lead to better repayment of the loans. So the delayed exit, there are failed firms. Now there is already an insolvency and bankruptcy code. But however, the corporate house is now having a control on the banks. Now the banks, it can somehow make the banks, compel the banks to ensure that the exit is delayed, so that the corporate house or the company which is now defaulted on the loan will get more time to revive its business, or it'll get just continue its business. So therefore this capacity to delay or to capacity to prevent the exit of the company is always there in the case of the corporate houses trying to control the banks. The third issue is the entrance to domination. So when the corporate houses are running kind of running the financial system or kind of running the banks, then definitely it risks a huge domination that these corporate houses might have. So these corporate houses might become so dominant that they become more dominant over the other companies in their field and also in the different fields. They might ensure that the other companies in their field do not get credit from those banks, and all those rivalries will start to operate in the economy. And also they might become so powerful that even the regulators cannot control, and sometime even maybe the government cannot control. So they will start dictating agendas, and it will lead to a lot of entrenched domination that can happen. For example, if one corporate house is operating in the payment space, so in such a case, it can use the bank that it controls into leveraging that advantage into becoming or creating a space in the e-commerce. So like that, it can use that advantage, and also it can prevent other players within the same industry from getting credit from that banks, because one corporate house is controlling the bank. So it will lead to entrenched domination. Then issue is a regulation. So now if you look at the regulation, the responsibility of regulating the banks is with the Reserve Bank of India. But in spite of the fact that the RBI has done really well, but we still have seen banking scams. We have seen the Punjab and National Bank scam, the Yes Bank issue. So the banking sector has not been doing really well in India. So first of all, we need to ensure that we are able to regulate the banks effectively. Only then, once we ensure that the banks are effectively regulated, then we can think of expanding the banks and giving the corporate houses also the control over the banks. So that expansion can be done later on. But as of now, there are so many issues that are ailing the banking sector. So now is the time. Now we also have the pandemic. So now is the time that we reset all these things, and we are able to evolve a framework which will lead to effective regulation of the banks in the first place, which are existing. So later on, we can think about expanding the number of banks and giving corporate houses the control over these banks and all that. So first of all, what is required as of now, the most important thing is effective regulation, which RBI must focus on now, rather than diverting its attention to how to regulate the corporate houses so that they do not take undue advantage of controlling a bank. The next issue is the pandemic damage. Now, pandemic has also caused a lot of damage. We have seen in the analysis in the previous week how the pandemic has led to a rise of the non-performing assets in the banking sector. So in such a case, now all the attention of the RBI in case of regulating the banks must be focused on how to improve the performance of these banks, how to reduce the non-performing assets of these banks. That is where the whole concentration should now lie, in order to bring back these banks to a better and a healthier state compared to what they are today because of the rising NPAs. So this, because the pandemic has now caused a damage to the banking sector by increasing the NPAs, we must now first focus on bettering the financial health of the banking system, and only then we can think about the other reforms that we want to try and bring in. And the last is the quality of credit. So in this case, one thing that has been always we felt like it is wanting in the economic or the banking sector is that it is not just the quantity of the credit, but the quality of credit is also very important. That is, whenever a bank is lending, it must lend based on analyzing who it is lending it to. So we need to lend it to those firms or those companies or those people who might make a very economical or an optimum utilization of that money. So we do not want, or the banks do not want, these loans turning into NPAs. Rather, they want these loans to be put to more effective uses. So it should be economically efficient when the lending happens. That is what is called as a quality of credit. So this has been lacking because lending has many times happened to some of the risky activities, some of the firms which have not been doing well. So that is why there has been a rise in the NPAs of the banks. So we really must focus on economical efficiency. That is, we need to focus on quality of credit that is being given by the banks. So in such cases, imagine the corporate houses controlling these banks. Then the banks will have no say in determining who should be given credit. It is a corporate house which will be controlling who should be given the money, who should be given the credit. In such cases, it might so happen that the money might go into some of those areas which may not be very economical, which may not actually lead to proper repayment of the loans, which may not be an economical activity. So in such cases, the quality of credit might suffer because it is not the bank that is going to make decision based on the pros and cons, but rather it would be the corporate house which is going to make the decision as to who the bank is going to lend. So this is another reason that can be problematic for by in giving the corporate houses control over the banks. So this was about this issue. Now we move on to the next topic, which is related to the center and the state finances. This can be a part of your GS2 syllabus, which talks about devolution of finances and all that, or the center-state financial relations. Or it can be a part of your GS3 syllabus, which discusses about the budgeting or the finances in general. The first issue is with respect to the borrowings. So now, because of the pandemic, the expenditure of both the central and the state governments have increased because they will have to take care of the people. At the same time, due to the lockdown, the economic activity has also come to a standstill. So because of the increased expenditure that the center and the states had to bear, they had to resort to increased borrowings, which means more debts that is incurred by both the central and the state government. So the data shows that the borrowings this year has been, the data for this year has shown that the debt levels of the government have really increased. So the general government debt is 76.7% of the GDP, of which 50.4% is of the center, while 26.3% is of the states. So this data is actually a 9-year high, which shows a 9-year high. This shows the level of borrowings that the governments have resorted to and the level of debts that they have now accumulated in order that has risen the level of debts for both the center and the state. So this is one data or one trend that you have to remember, that the debt levels have shown a 9-year high and the borrowings have increased because the expenditure of the government has increased in the context of the pandemic. Second important observation, or rather related to this, is the RBI's State Finances Study of Budgets to 2020-2021. This publication has been made by RBI. So in this publication, it is seen that the capital spending by the states has become pro-cyclical. That means what? The state governments will have to spend, that is capital expenditure will have to be done by the state governments for creating some assets, let's say. But this has become pro-cyclical, which means that whenever the economy is doing bad, then the state's capital expenditure is low. But when the economy is doing good, the state's capital expenditure is good. But it should have actually been the other way around. That is, when the economy is doing bad, then the state must come forward and it must increase its capital expenditure so that the demand is created in the economy. So, but however, this has been pro-cyclical, which is something that shouldn't be done. This is one thing. And the second thing is, this report also says that the 12 states have a debt to GDP ratio of GSDP, that is a state gross state domestic product ratio of more than 25%. So this again shows at the worsening financial health of several states because of the increased expenditure that they have been incurring in the light of the pandemic. So this you can, all these data you can quote to support the stress in the finances at both the center and the level. The second is related to the capital expenditure. So in 2019 and 20, the states had the budgeted capital expenditure was actually 6.22 lakh crore. But however, what they eventually spent was 4.97 lakh crore, which means the capital expenditure has come down by 20%. But it is a capital expenditure which is more important because that is going to create some asset. But the revenue expenditure is mostly, it goes on salaries, subsidies, etc. So this revenue expenditure has gone down only by 9%, but the capital expenditure has gone down by 20%. So this shows that while the government is stressed of finances and it is unable to do that expenditure at the level which it is required to do, but it is cutting down the capital expenditure to a more extent, but the revenue expenditure is still cut by a smaller extent. The third issue is a private investment. Now there is a lot of uncertainty in the economy because of the pandemic and other issues as well. So apart from the uncertainty that is prevailing in the economy, even the capacity utilization in the economy is also low. That is, some capacity is already created in the economy, but it has not been put to use or it has not been utilized to 100%. So this capacity utilization, which was 72% before the pandemic struck, now it has reduced down to 58.6%. So the private sector is feeling that some capacity which is already created itself is not utilized properly. Then what is the need for creating a new capacity, or what is the need for further investing in the economy? So because of this thought process, the private sector is also not investing, or is not seeing it very welcoming to invest in the economy at this point of time, because of the uncertainty and the lower capacity utilization. And the private investment has also been very low. The major issues related to the center and the state finances, which this article has discussed. So based on the question that is asked in your exam, you must be able to use these trends in the center state finances and fit the relevant portions in the relevant data into those answers. These were the other topics that weren't relevant from your exam point of view, or we have already discussed these topics before. So that's it for today. Thank you.